Imagine you're serving on a jury. The defendant is accused of some heinous crime. The prosecuting attorney has evidence that he says implicates the defendant beyond reasonable doubt. He says the evidence is as clear as day, and that you must vote to convict. This criminal must be put behind bars, you're told, because he's a threat to society. The defense attorney is arguing just as vehemently that the evidence is not so clear-cut. The defendant has an alibi, albeit not one that's airtight. There are fingerprints at the crime scene that don't match the defendant's. He suggests the police may have mishandled the forensic evidence, the DNA and hair samples. The defense argues that the case is not nearly as definitive as the prosecutor has led you to believe. If you have reasonable doubt, as you should, you must acquit, he says. If you put an innocent man behind bars, you're told, not only do you do that person an incalculable injustice, but you leave the guilty party free to strike again. In the jury room, your job is to assess the claims and counterclaims and make a decision based solely on the evidence. It doesn't matter what your inclinations might have been when the trial began. It doesn't matter whether you thought the defendant looked guilty or didn't appear to be the kind of person who could commit such a horrible act. All that matters is the evidence and whether or not it's convincing. One thing we know about criminal justice is that innocent people are often convicted of crimes they didn't commit, despite a judiciary system that is dedicated to avoiding just that outcome. A common theme in the litany of justice, poorly served, is that those wrongly convicted are typically the obvious suspects. Their conviction feels right. Evidence that might exculpate them is more easily disregarded. Complicated questions are pushed aside, as is evidence that just might free them after their conviction. It would be nice to think that science and scientists don't make such errors, but they happen all the time. It's human nature. The methods of science are supposed to guard against the adoption of false convictions, but these methods aren't always followed, and even when they are, inferring the truth about nature and the universe is a difficult business. Common sense can be an effective guide, but as Voltaire pointed out in his Dictionnaire philosophique, common sense isn't all that common, even among scientists. And often what science tells us is that the things that appear to be common sense aren't. The sun does not revolve around the earth, for example, despite superficial appearances to the contrary. What sets science and the law apart from religion is that nothing is expected to be taken on faith. We're encouraged to ask whether the evidence actually supports what we're being told to believe, or what we grew up believing. And we're allowed to ask whether we're hearing all the evidence or just some small prejudicial part of it. If our beliefs aren't supported by the evidence, then we're encouraged to alter our beliefs. It is surprisingly easy to find evidence that refutes the conviction that we get fat because we take in more calories than we expend. That is, because we overeat. In most of science, skeptical appraisals of the evidence are considered a fundamental requirement to make progress. In nutrition and public health, however, they are seen by many as counterproductive because they undermine efforts to promote behaviors that the authorities believe, rightly or wrongly, are good for us. But our health and our weight are at stake here. So let's take a look at this evidence and see where it leads us. Imagine we're on a jury charged with deciding whether or not it's overeating, taking in more calories than we expend, that is responsible for the crime of obesity and overweight.